I need to tell you about something that happened to me in the fall of 2019, deep in the forests of northern Washington state. I know how this will sound. Trust me, I get the skepticism because I am one of the biggest skeptics out there. But what I went through on those 2 trips into the wilderness changed everything I thought I knew. I now understand what really exists in those ancient forests. It all started on a Thursday morning in late October. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that any hunter would envy. It was cold enough to keep you alert, but not so cold that your fingers went numb on the rifle trigger. I had been planning this hunting trip for months, saving up vacation days from my job at the lumber mill, just so I could spend a week in the remote wilderness hunting elk. The area I chose was pretty isolated, about 15 miles from the nearest logging road, meaning I would be completely alone out there. That was exactly what I wanted. Honestly, the first 2 days were perfect. I set up camp near a small creek, far enough from the water so I wouldn't disturb any animals that might come to drink, but close enough to fill my water bottles easily. The weather was clear and cool, and I had seen plenty of signs: elk droppings, tracks in the soft earth near the creek, and scratches on small trees where the bulls had marked their territory. Everything pointed to a successful trip. By the 3rd day, things started to change. I woke up around 4 a.m., as usual, made myself a cup of instant coffee on the camp stove, and headed out before sunrise. I was hiking along a ridge about 3 miles from camp, moving slowly and quietly when I felt it. You know that prickling sensation on the back of your neck when something's not right? I stopped and listened, really listened, but all I could hear was the wind rustling through the pines and the occasional crow cawing from somewhere in the distance. I pushed the thought aside and continued on. By mid-morning, I still hadn't seen anything worth shooting, so I decided to head down into a valley I had marked on the map. The terrain was rough, with plenty of fallen trees and dense brush, but the valley looked promising. About halfway down the slope, I found something that made me stop in my tracks. It was a footprint, imprinted in a patch of soft mud near a fallen log. I had been hunting in this forest for over 20 years, and I knew all the tracks here. Deer, elk, bears, cougars, wolves. I could recognize them all with just a glance. But this footprint didn't match anything I knew. It was huge, about 15 inches long and 7 inches wide at its widest point. It vaguely resembled a human foot, with 5 distinct toes at the front. But something was off. The proportions were all wrong. The depth of the print suggested something extremely heavy, and there were no signs of boots or shoes, just bare skin, or something that looked like bare skin pressing into the mud. The toes had visible nail marks at the tips. I stood there, staring at the print for 5 minutes, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that someone was messing with me, maybe using one of those Bigfoot costume feet you can buy online to trick people. But we were 15 miles from the nearest road, and I hadn't seen any signs of other people in the area. Who would bring a fake Bigfoot foot out into the wilderness just to fool someone? It didn't make sense. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, even though I knew there was no cell service, and I wouldn't be able to send them to anyone until I got back to civilization. I continued on, but the uneasy feeling I had earlier only grew stronger. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, watching the tree line, listening for any sounds that didn't belong. The forest was unnervingly silent. No bird songs, no squirrels chattering in the trees, just the wind. By noon, I decided to head back to camp. I still hadn't seen any elk, and there was something about that valley that felt wrong. I couldn't explain it, but every instinct told me to get out of there. I started climbing back up the slope, moving faster than usual, no longer worrying about being quiet. That was when I saw it. I stopped to catch my breath about 3/4 of the way up the hill when something moved. About 70 yards away, through the trees, something large was standing behind a cluster of dense pines. At first, I thought it was a bear standing on its hind legs, but bears don't stand like that. They can only do it for a few seconds. This thing just stood there, motionless, and it had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I slowly raised my rifle, peering through the scope for a better look, but the Bigfoot had moved. It didn't run, didn't crash through the brush like a scared animal. It just disappeared, as if it had blended into the shadows between the trees. I stood frozen, rifle still raised, my eyes darting between the trees. Nothing. What I had just seen was gone. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, that it was just some play of light and shadow. Maybe it was a weirdly shaped branch or a tree trunk my tired brain had misinterpreted. But I knew what I had seen. The Bigfoot was still there, watching me. And when I looked directly at it, it vanished. The hike back to camp took twice as long as expected. Every 50 yards, I stopped to listen, looking around, making sure nothing was following me. The sun was starting to set behind the western peaks, and I knew I needed to get back before dark, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every snapping twig, every rustling bush made me jump. I had gone from the hunter to the hunted, and the role reversal was terrifying. By the time I reached camp, the sun was just kissing the mountaintops to the west. I probably had another hour of good light left. My first instinct was to pack up everything and hike out that night, but my rational side told me that was a terrible idea. Trying to cover 15 miles of rough terrain in the dark, especially when I was already scared and exhausted, would only get me into trouble. I could break an ankle, get lost, or worse. I knew I had to stay put, keep the fire going, and wait for the morning. I gathered more wood than usual, piling it high next to the tent. Then, I tried to eat something, though my stomach was in knots. I gripped my rifle tightly, chambered around, and prepared myself. As the darkness settled in, I made the fire burn brighter than necessary. The flames crackled and sent sparks spiraling into the night sky. I sat on a log, facing away from the tent, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. That was when I heard it. A sound unlike anything I had ever heard during my years in the forest. It started low, almost like a rumble, and then rose in pitch until it became a mournful, haunting wail. The sound seemed to echo from the mountains. It wasn't a wolf. I knew how wolves sounded. It wasn't a cougar, a bear, or any other animal I could recognize. The sound came from somewhere on the slope above my camp, about a quarter of a mile away, and it made every hair on my body stand on end. The howl faded, and the forest fell silent again. I sat there, my hand clutching the rifle, my finger hovering on the trigger, nearly holding my breath. A few minutes passed. Then, I heard another noise. The sound of something large moving through the forest. It wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. A branch snapped, heavy footsteps on the forest floor, moving down the slope toward my camp. I stood up. I pressed the rifle against my shoulder, trying to peer beyond the glow of the fire. The footsteps stopped. Whatever it was, it had stopped perhaps 45 yards from my camp, just out of the firelight. I could feel it watching me. My mouth went dry, and my hands shook so badly I had to tighten my grip on the rifle to steady it. Then, I saw movement. The Bigfoot stepped into my line of sight at the edge of the firelight, mostly hidden behind a large cedar tree. All I could make out was a massive shape standing in the darkness, about 8 feet tall. Its eyes caught the firelight and reflected back at me. 2 amber points of light seemed to glow with the fire within them. We stood there like that for what felt like forever, though it was probably just 1 or 2 minutes. The Bigfoot was watching me from the shadows. I stood by the fire, rifle raised. Neither of us moved. My brain screamed at me to fire, at least take a warning shot, but something stopped me. The Bigfoot wasn't charging at me. There was no sign of aggression, nothing threatening. The Bigfoot just stood there, observing. Finally, it backed away and melted into the darkness. I heard the footsteps retreating up the slope, growing quieter until they vanished entirely. I stayed by the fire for another hour, maybe longer, before lowering my rifle. My arm ached from holding it up so long, and I was shaking from the adrenaline. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire blazing and sat there until the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the trees. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide something large and mysterious, but the creature never returned, at least not as far as I could see. When there was finally enough light to see clearly, I packed up camp faster than I ever had before. The walk back to the truck was supposed to take about 6 hours if I went at a normal pace. I took 4 steps, hardly stopping to rest, constantly glancing over my shoulder. I didn't see any more signs of the Bigfoot. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, that something was leading me through the forest, just out of sight. About 3 kilometers from the logging road, I had to take a detour. I followed a hunting trail that I knew would take me back to the main road, but when I reached a bend, there it was, the Bigfoot, standing right in the middle of the trail, about 40 feet ahead. In the daylight, I could see it more clearly. The Bigfoot was huge, covered in dark brown fur, nearly black in the shadows. Its shoulders were unbelievably broad, and its arms hung down, longer than a human's knees. The Bigfoot just stood there in the middle of the trail, facing me, motionless. My first instinct was to turn and run, but I knew that was the wrong thing to do. You never run from a predator. That activates their hunting instinct. So, I stood still, hand on my rifle, but not raising it. And we stared at each other across the 40-foot trail in the woods. The Bigfoot's face was hard to make out, mostly hidden by fur, but I could see its eyes. They were intelligent eyes, not like an animal's. Behind them, there was thought, awareness. About 30 seconds later, the Bigfoot turned and walked off the trail into the thick trees, moving with an ease that seemed impossible for such a large creature. It didn't rush, didn't crash through the brush. It just walked away as if it had made a decision. I didn't have enough interest left to care anymore. I waited a few more minutes to make sure the Bigfoot had truly gone. Then I left the trail and circled the area, going about half a mile further along my path. But after walking a certain distance, and where I last saw the Bigfoot, I encountered it again about an hour later. I was walking along the dry creek bed, using the open ground to shorten my route, when suddenly that feeling came back, the sharp sense that I was not alone. I looked up and saw the Bigfoot standing on a rock outcrop about 20 feet above the creek, watching me. Our eyes met for just a second. Then I quickly turned away and kept walking, trying to act like I hadn't seen anything, trying not to show fear. This time, Bigfoot didn't chase after me, at least not as far as I could tell. But I had to take 2 more detours before reaching the logging road. Each time, I felt like I was being drawn off course. And each time, I trusted my instincts and changed direction. I never saw any big game on that hike, but I knew it was still out there, watching me through the forest, maybe making sure I was really leaving its territory. When I finally reached my truck, I had never been so glad to see a vehicle in my life. I tossed my backpack into the truck bed, climbed in, and sat there for a few minutes with the doors locked, trying to process everything that had just happened. My hands were still shaking when I started the engine and drove back toward the logging road, heading toward civilization. At first, I didn't tell anyone about what had happened. How could I? I'm a practical person, always have been. Before this, if anyone had told me they saw Bigfoot in the woods, I would have laughed in their face. But now, I had my own experience, and I didn't know what to do with it. I spent the next few weeks thinking about it, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation, some way to convince myself that I was just tired, scared, and let my imagination run wild. But I couldn't shake it. I had seen what I saw. More than that, I had felt what I felt. The unmistakable, primal sense that I was facing something powerful and invisible. The memory of those eyes glowing in the firelight, the massive shape on the edge of my vision, the way the Bigfoot intelligently watched me before walking away, none of it felt like a dream or a hallucination. It felt real, because it was real. 2 months passed, winter came, and the highlands were buried under several feet of snow, making it impossible to return to that area, even if I had wanted to. But I found myself thinking about it constantly, not out of fear anymore, but curiosity. The more I thought about that encounter, the more I realized that Bigfoot had never really threatened me. Sure, it scared me half to death, but looking back, all the aggressive actions were mine. I was the one who raised the rifle, ready to shoot. Bigfoot was just there, watching, probably trying to figure out what I was doing in its territory. That realization changed something inside me. I started reading everything I could find about Bigfoot encounters. I knew there had been thousands of reports of sightings going back hundreds of years across North America. Most of them followed a similar pattern. People stumbled upon these creatures in remote areas. Bigfoot avoided direct contact, occasionally showing up but rarely displaying any real aggression. The more I read, the more I became convinced these creatures were real and far more intelligent than most people realized. When spring arrived and the snow began to melt in the highlands, I made a decision. This time, I wasn't going back to hunt elk. I was going back to find the source of the big game. I wanted to understand what it was, how it lived, and why it chose to reveal itself to me. I knew it sounded crazy, even to me, but I couldn't let it go. I had to learn more. I spent weeks preparing for this second trip, I bought a better camera with a telephoto lens, extra batteries and memory cards, and a good pair of binoculars. I studied the area's map, marking the spots where I'd seen the Bigfoot, trying to determine possible travel routes. I even traded my small caliber hunting rifle for something easier to carry on long hikes. Not that I planned to shoot anything, but the forest can be dangerous and I wasn't foolish. I returned at the end of May, when the weather had finally stabilized and most of the snow in the lower elevations had melted. I parked in the same spot on the logging road and hiked into the same area, but this time I set up camp in a different location. I wanted to be closer to where I first saw the Bigfoot, on the ridge above the valley. I spent almost the entire first day just hiking and setting up camp, but I didn't mind. This time, I wasn't in a rush. For the first 3 days, I didn't see anything unusual. I spent my time hiking around the area, looking for signs. I found some, though. Tracks, a few prints in the soft ground near the creek and in patches of leftover snow. The tracks were always the same. Huge, human-like footprints, with 5 distinct toes, far too large for any person. I took pictures of everyone I found, marking their locations on the map, trying to identify patterns. By the 4th day, I discovered something else. Deep in the forest, I found an area where several large trees were bent and twisted together, forming a kind of arch or shelter. The trees weren't dead. They were still growing but had been manipulated when they were young, bent and twisted into strange shapes. No animal could do that. Even humans would have trouble bending such large trees without tools. But something had done it, and judging by the age of the trees, it had happened years ago. I set up the camera on a nearby tripod, aimed at the tree structure, and set it to time-lapse while I explored the surrounding area. I found even more strange things. Large rocks piled up in deliberate stacks, blocks shaped like logs that looked almost like markers or signs, and many other traces. Whatever lived here had been in the area for a long time. That night, while sitting by the campfire cooking dinner, I heard that haunting howl again, the same howl that had scared me on the first trip. But this time I wasn't afraid. I slowly stood up, looked toward the mountain ridge where the sound came from, and called back. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I cupped my hands around my mouth and tried to mimic the sound as best as I could. Compared to the real thing, my howl sounded pathetic, more like a strangled scream than an actual howl, but I gave it my best shot. Silence hung for a long while. Then, from a different spot on the mountain slope, I heard another call. This one was different, shorter, with a different tone. Then a third call rang out from somewhere to my left, and I realized there was more than one out there. Multiple Bigfoot were communicating with each other, and now they had probably realized I was trying to communicate with them. That night, I didn't sleep much, but for different reasons than before. I wasn't scared, or at least not as scared as before. I was excited, full of energy from the idea that I might actually be able to communicate with these creatures. I kept the fire going and sat there listening to the occasional calls echoing through the woods, trying to pinpoint where they were coming from, how many there were. The next morning, I found more tracks right at the edge of my camp. The Bigfoot had come down from the ridge during the night and circled my camp, no more than 20 yards away, never getting any closer. The footprints were fresh, deeply imprinted into the soft ground, and they were enormous. I took careful photos, placing my size 11 boot next to them for comparison. My boot looked like a child's shoe next to those giant tracks. I spent the entire day tracking the trail, moving slowly and carefully, trying not to disturb anything. The path led me up the slope and then along the ridge for about a mile. Bigfoot moved fast, with long strides, and there were places where I could see it had used all 4 limbs to climb particularly steep sections. The tracks clearly showed all 4 limbs, hands and feet were massive. Eventually, the trail led me to another shelter area, more complex than the first. Someone or something had created a nest from broken branches and moss, hiding beneath a jutting rock to shield itself from rain and snow. Nearby, I found more stick structures, and what remained looked like a meal, piles of bones from deer and elk. All had been broken to extract the marrow. As I was photographing the nest, I felt it again, that sensation of being watched. I slowly turned around, instinctively reaching for the rifle on my back, and there it was, Bigfoot, about 30 feet away, hidden behind a large fir tree, watching me, inspecting its shelter. We stood there, just staring at each other. Bigfoot was massive, even larger than I had imagined. It had to be nearly 9 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed capable of pushing over a small car. Its face was flatter than a gorilla's, more human-like, but still clearly not human. Dark brown fur covered most of its body, and I could see the muscles underneath shifting as Bigfoot shifted its weight from one foot to the other. I slowly lowered my hand from the rifle and raised both arms, palms facing outward, trying to show I wasn't a threat. Bigfoot regarded this gesture curiously, tilting its head to the side. Then, to my surprise, Bigfoot raised one of its massive hands and mimicked my gesture, holding its palm out toward me. My heart raced, but I kept calm. Slowly, I reached into my backpack and pulled out an apple. I had packed some apples as snacks, and I wasn't sure if Bigfoot would want one, but it was the only thing I could think of offering. I held the apple up for Bigfoot to see, then placed it on a rock between us and stepped back. Bigfoot looked at me, then at the apple, and back at me. For a moment, I thought it would just walk away, but instead, it took a few steps forward, moving with the same fluidity I had seen before. Bigfoot picked up the apple, inspected it, and then took a bite. The crunch echoed clearly in the quiet forest. Bigfoot devoured the apple in 3 bites, core and all, then looked at me expectantly. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Here I was, in the wilderness, feeding an apple to Bigfoot like it was some kind of zoo animal. Bigfoot tilted its head again, clearly curious about the sound of my laughter. And I swear, I saw something like amusement in those dark, intelligent eyes. I handed it another apple, and this time Bigfoot stepped closer to grab it from my hand. Its fingers were massive, thick, and strong. But Bigfoot took the apple gently, careful not to hurt me. Up close, I could see that its fur wasn't just brown. It had hints of red and gray, and it was much longer than it had seemed from a distance. Bigfoot smelled of the forest, of earth and pine needles, and something wild that I couldn't identify. We spent about an hour together that day. I gave Bigfoot the rest of my apples, and it seemed content to sit nearby and eat while I took pictures. I tried to move slowly and avoid any sudden movements, and Bigfoot seemed to appreciate that. When the apples were finished, Bigfoot stood up, stared at me for a long moment, then silently walked away, disappearing into the woods without a sound. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had just had a peaceful encounter with Bigfoot, something that was supposed to be non-existent, something most people would laugh at if I told them it was real. But I had the photos to prove it. Clear, well-lit pictures of Bigfoot eating the apple, close-ups of its face and hands, images showing every detail of its massive physique. The next 3 days were incredible. Bigfoot returned to my camp every day, usually in the late afternoon. I'd see Bigfoot coming through the trees, and I'd sit down, eating something more apples, some jerky, even a few candy bars that Bigfoot seemed particularly fond of. We'd sit together for hours, not really communicating in any conventional way, but somehow understanding each other. I learned so much about Bigfoot during those days. I could tell Bigfoot was very curious about my equipment, especially the camera. Bigfoot would lean in close to look at the pictures on the screen when I showed them. That massive face was inches away, studying the photos with clear interest. I realized Bigfoot had a sense of humor. When I tripped over a root and fell flat on my face, I heard what I can only describe as a chuckle, a low, rumbling breath from Bigfoot's chest. I also realized that Bigfoot wasn't alone. On the 6th day, Bigfoot brought another one with it smaller, about 6½ feet tall, with lighter fur. This second Bigfoot seemed much more nervous, standing off at a distance while the first one ate all the food I had brought. I didn't push it, just let both of them do what they were comfortable with. By the end of that week, it felt like I had formed a kind of bond with these creatures. I know that sounds crazy, but it's the only way I can describe it. The big one would wait near my camp every afternoon, and we'd spend time together before the sun set. Bigfoot showed me things, places in the forest I would never have found on my own, trees marked in specific ways, rocks arranged in ways that looked like crude tools. One afternoon, Bigfoot led me to a small meadow about a mile from my camp. There were several large prey animals there, maybe 5 or 6, including one that looked like a young bull, about 4 tons. They were foraging, digging up roots, and eating. When we got close, all of them stopped and stared at me, and I froze, suddenly aware that I was completely surrounded by these massive creatures. But the lead one, Bigfoot, let out a low growl, and the others seemed to relax. They went back to foraging, barely paying attention to me. though the younger ones still cast curious glances my way. I stood there at the edge of the meadow just watching them, and felt incredibly lucky in a way I had never experienced before. I was witnessing something that only a few people in history have ever seen. A family of Sasquatch living their everyday lives. The Bigfoot mother, I guessed. I assumed it was the mother, based on how she protected the young one. During that time, it stood between me and its young. The little one nursed for a few minutes, then looked up to check on me, making sure I wasn't getting too close. Eventually, the young Bigfoot gathered enough courage to move a little closer, and its mother allowed it, though she still watched carefully. The young Bigfoot looked at me with the same intelligent eyes I had seen in the large male, and I found myself smiling. The little one tilted its head, mimicking my expression in a way that seemed almost human. I stood there for about an hour, just observing. I took a few photos, but carefully avoided using the flash or making any sudden movements. When the group started moving deeper into the forest, the large male Bigfoot turned around to look at me, almost as if saying goodbye. I waved, and I swear, Bigfoot nodded before disappearing into the woods. That night, my last night at the camp, I reflected on everything that had happened during the past week. I had come into the forest seeking answers, trying to understand what these creatures were and how they lived. What I found was far deeper than anything I had expected. They weren't just animals. They were intelligent beings with their own culture, their own society, their own way of life. They had chosen to share a small part of that with me, and I felt incredibly small in the face of this experience. That evening, as I was cooking dinner, Bigfoot emerged from the trees. I offered him some of my food, and he sat down by the fire, facing me. We sat like that for a long time, just sitting together in a comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. When I began packing up my things the next morning, preparing to leave, he was there, watching me. I set out some food, the last of my supplies, as a parting gift, and he ate slowly, as if he understood this was goodbye. When everything was packed, and I had slung my backpack over my shoulder, I turned to face Bigfoot one last time. I didn't know what to say. How do you thank someone for changing your entire worldview? For showing you that there's still magic and mystery in the world? I decided to raise my hand one more time, just like the first peaceful encounter we had, palms facing out. Bigfoot mimicked me, raising one massive hand, and we stood there like that for a while. Then, I turned and began walking out. I looked back once I reached the top of the first ridge. Bigfoot was still standing there, by my old camp, watching me leave. I waved one more time, and Bigfoot waved back. Then, I turned and continued down the trail toward the logging road. The hike out was bittersweet. A part of me didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay in those mountains, spend more time with the Bigfoot family. I had discovered something precious, but I knew I couldn't. I had a life to return to, responsibilities to fulfill, a job that was probably wondering where I had disappeared to. And more than that, I knew I had been given something rare and valuable, a fleeting glimpse into a world that most people would never see, and I needed to cherish that. Since then, I've returned to those mountains 3 more times, always in the spring or early summer when the weather was good. Each time, the large Bigfoot found me within a day or 2 of my arrival. By now, we had formed a routine. I brought food, we spent time together, and Bigfoot showed me more of his world. I've learned so much about how these creatures live, how they communicate, how they move through the forest without leaving much trace. I've seen young Bigfoots growing more confident. I've watched entire families interact, witnessing the affection and joy that remind me more of humans than animals. I've heard them communicate with sounds that are almost like language. Their vocalizations are complex, but clearly meaningful, even though I couldn't understand what they were saying. I also learned how to keep this to myself. I've shared the story with a few close friends, people I trust, but I haven't gone around broadcasting it. I don't want to lead anyone into this realm. I don't want to disturb what I've found here. These creatures have survived for so long by hiding, avoiding contact with humans, and I'm not going to be the one to ruin that for them. The photos I took during that second trip are safely stored away. They are clear, undeniable evidence of these creatures' existence, but I've never shown them to anyone except my closest friends. A part of me wishes I could share them with the world, prove once and for all that Bigfoot is real. But a larger part of me knows that doing so would betray the trust these creatures have placed in me. Sometimes I think back to that first trip, how terrified I was when I realized I was being hunted. I almost shot that massive male Bigfoot when he finally came close. Now, I'm grateful that I hesitated, that I saw the curiosity in his eyes instead of aggression. If I had pulled the trigger, I would have killed an intelligent being, destroyed something rare and irreplaceable, and I would have never had any of the experiences that came after. The truth is, I'm not sure who was hunting who on that first trip. I went into the mountains looking for elk, but what I found was far more important. The Bigfoot were watching me. Yes, they were studying me, trying to figure out who I was and what I was doing in their territory. But in doing so, they gave me a chance to see beyond my own biases, to recognize intelligence and awareness in a form I had never imagined. Lately, when I'm working at the mill, running errands in town, or doing any of the mundane tasks of daily life, I think about those mountains. I think about the big-footed giant and his family. I wonder what they're doing, if they ever think of me the way I think of them. I've already planned another trip for next month, and I find myself counting the days. Sometimes people ask me why I keep going back, why I spend my vacation days hiking into remote wilderness areas instead of going somewhere comfortable and relaxing. I never know how to explain it. How do you tell someone you found something more valuable than comfort, more meaningful than relaxation? How do you explain that you were accepted, even if only for a brief moment and in part, into a world that exists parallel to ours, but still mostly hidden from us? I can't explain it. I really can't. But I know that the trips to the mountains, those quiet moments sitting with creatures that most people don't even believe exist, have become the most important part of my life. They've taught me patience, respect, and humility. They've shown me a world that's wider, stranger, and more amazing than I ever imagined. That first trip changed me because it shattered my beliefs about what was possible. The second trip, and all the ones that followed, changed me because they showed me what can happen when you approach the unknown with openness rather than fear. I went from being the hunter to being the hunted, and then became something entirely different. A witness, a student, maybe even a friend. I don't know how many more trips I'll make. The big male is getting older. I can see more gray in his fur every time I visit, and sometimes he moves a little slower than before. The wilderness itself is under constant threat from development, logging, and climate change. The remote lands where these creatures can live undisturbed are shrinking every year. But for now, at least, I still have this. I still have the memories of those encounters, the moments spent with creatures that have bridged the gap between animal and human, reminding me of how much we still don't understand about the world we live in. I know that somewhere on those mountains, a Sasquatch family is living its life, hunting, foraging, raising its young, completely indifferent to the fact that most of humanity doesn't believe they exist. And I have something else, a sense of responsibility. I was gifted a rare opportunity when that massive creature chose to appear before me instead of hiding away. Bigfoot trusted me enough to let me enter its world, to share its territory and its family with me. That's not something I take lightly. That's why I don't share the exact location with anyone. That's why I keep the best photos to myself. That's why I'm careful with how much I reveal. Even now, a part of me still wishes I could do more, somehow protect these creatures and ensure they continue to exist through many generations. But I'm only human, and the challenges they face are far greater than anything I could address on my own. The best I can do is respect their privacy, keep their secret, and hope that others who stumble upon them will do the same. I've thought a lot about why the large male Bigfoot chose to reveal itself to me in the first place. On that first trip, when I ran in fear, trying to avoid Bigfoot, it could have easily hidden. It could have seen me panicking and running away without ever revealing itself. But instead, Bigfoot kept appearing, showing itself over and over, almost as if it was testing me, seeing how I would react. And then, the moment I was exhausted from running, when I finally collapsed to the ground with my rifle in hand, ready to defend myself, Bigfoot kept coming closer. It came close enough for me to have easily shot it. It got close enough that it could have been dangerous. But Bigfoot still came forward, and when I saw that it wasn't aggressive, when I lowered my weapon, something shifted between us. I think Bigfoot recognized something in that moment. It saw that I had the ability to overcome my fear and make a different choice. And that's why, months later, when I returned, Bigfoot was ready to approach me again. It remembered me. It remembered that I chose not to shoot, and it decided to try again. This makes me wonder how many others have had similar chances but missed them. How many hunters or hikers have seen a Bigfoot in the woods and immediately fired or run away screaming or reacted with fear and hostility to the point that these creatures learned to avoid all contact with humans? And how many potential moments of connection have been lost because of that fear? I'm not saying everyone should go into the woods looking for Bigfoot. That would be incredibly dangerous for both humans and animals. They are wild creatures, intelligent, yes, but still wild, and they deserve to be left in peace. But I think there's something we can learn from our experiences about how we approach the unknown in general. When we encounter something that doesn't fit into our understanding of the world, our first instinct is often to destroy it or deny its existence. We react with fear and aggression because that's how we've learned to cope with threats. But what if we stop? What if we take a moment to observe, to try to understand, to see if this unknown thing is truly a threat? That's exactly what happened with me on that mountainside when I finally stopped running and faced Bigfoot. I was terrified, exhausted, ready to fight for my life. But when Bigfoot came closer, and I saw the curiosity in its eyes instead of aggression, I made a different choice. I chose to lower my weapon and see what would happen. And that choice opened up a whole new world for me. During my most recent trip, about 6 months ago, something happened that made me truly understand this. I had been visiting the big male Bigfoot for a few days, and we were back in our usual routine. But on the third day, when Bigfoot came to my camp, I noticed something was off. It seemed restless, constantly glancing toward the mountain ridge, making sharp, short calls I hadn't heard before. I stood up in concern, and Bigfoot gently but firmly took my hand and pulled me toward the trees. I followed, confused but trusting that there was a reason for this behavior. Bigfoot led me swiftly through the forest, moving faster than I could comfortably keep up, until we reached a rocky outcrop and looked down into a small valley. Bigfoot pointed down at the valley, and I followed its gaze. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just trees, rocks, and a small stream running through the valley floor. But then I noticed movement. 3 men, heavily armed and in camouflage gear, were moving through the valley in a spread-out formation. They had large hunting dogs with them, sniffing the ground and tugging on their leashes. I felt my blood run cold. These weren't just ordinary hikers or hunters. These men were serious, professional, and clearly searching for something specific. I didn't need anyone to tell me what they were hunting. Bigfoot had spotted them from a distance and had come to warn me, making sure I wouldn't accidentally lead these hunters to the family. We stayed on that rocky outcrop for over an hour, watching the men search the valley below. Bigfoot was completely silent, barely moving, and I did the same. Eventually, the men moved further into the wilderness, and Bigfoot seemed to relax once they were out of sight. As we headed back to camp, I tried to express my gratitude, though I'm not sure how much Bigfoot understood, but that experience truly shook me. This made me realize just how fragile Bigfoot's existence really is. How many people out there want to capture or kill one of these creatures to prove their existence, to become famous, to make money from this discovery? Bigfoot trusted me enough to reveal itself, to share its world with me. And now, Bigfoot is actively protecting me from danger. The trust and mutual care between us, that's something I never imagined I'd find in the wilderness, and something I will never take for granted. Recently, I've been thinking about what will happen when I'm too old to make these trips anymore. I'm not young anymore. I'm in my 42nd, and hiking into remote areas is getting more difficult with every passing year. Eventually, there will come a time when I won't be able to continue. When the mountains surpass my physical capabilities, what will happen? A part of me wants to find someone else, someone younger and more reliable, to pass this knowledge on to. Someone who can continue visiting the Bigfoot family, who can maintain that connection and keep learning from them. But I don't know how to choose someone like that. How do you assess who deserves something like this? How do you know who won't exploit or ruin it? For now, I take it one trip at a time. Each trip could be my last, so I try to make the most of it. I bring my camera, I take notes. I sit with the large male Bigfoot and try to remember every detail. The sunlight filters through Bigfoot's fur, the low growl of satisfaction when he eats. Those enormous hands are surprisingly gentle, able to pick up small objects. The young Bigfoot I saw first is now nearly grown, probably close to 6 feet tall. The young one is much more comfortable around me now than it was with its mother. Occasionally it'll come closer, grabbing food from my hands. I've watched young Bigfoots learning from the adults, how to find certain plants, how to crack open nuts with rocks, how to move silently through the forest. It feels like I'm watching a documentary, only it's real, and I'm really there. I've also noticed some fascinating things about their social structure. The large male seems to be the leader of the family, but not in an authoritarian way. He makes decisions through what looks like consensus. I've witnessed them having what I can only describe as discussions, making all kinds of sounds and gestures until they seem to come to an agreement on something. The female has an equal say, and even the younger members seem to have a voice. They show affection for one another in very human ways. I've seen them grooming each other, carefully untangling knots in each other's hair. I've seen them playing, chasing each other through the trees, clearly having fun. I've even seen a scene that looked like mourning, just during one trip. The family was down to 4 members instead of 5, and they all seemed subdued, moving slowly and staying close to one another. I never found out what happened to the missing member, but the behavior of the others made it clear they felt the loss. All of this convinced me beyond a doubt that these creatures are not just animals. They are human in every sense. They have culture, language, family structures, and emotions. The only difference is that they are not human, and they've chosen to live apart from us, hiding in the wild places we haven't destroyed, and that's their right. After all, they were here first. Long before humans flooded this continent, these creatures lived on these mountains. Maybe their life hasn't changed much from then. They've witnessed our civilization grow and expand, watched us cut down forests, build cities, and fill the world with noise and pollution. And they've chosen to keep their distance, to hide, to preserve their way of life from all of that. Meeting them made me see my own life differently. When I returned to town, amidst the constant noise and rush of modern life, I find myself thinking about the simple life of Bigfoot. They don't have jobs, bills, or any of the pressures that govern human existence. They eat what they find, sleep when they're tired, and spend their days with their families. It's beautiful, something we've lost in our quest for progress and comfort. I'm not saying I want to live like a Bigfoot. I appreciate my plumbing and my home heating more than anything else. But there is some kind of balance between their life and ours. And I think most of us have gone too far in one direction. We've forgotten how to be still, how to observe, how to exist within nature without trying to control or exploit it. My first encounter when I stumbled through the forest, exhausted and terrified, being stalked by something I couldn't understand, that was probably the most vivid moment I've ever experienced. Every sense became heightened. Every moment was meaningful, and while I wouldn't want to relive that terror, I still want to hold on to the feeling of connection with the natural world, the feeling of being part of something larger than myself. The Bigfoot family taught me that. Every trip, every hour I spent quietly sitting with them reminded me that life is about more than what we can see from our homes and offices. There are still mysteries, unclassified wonders that haven't been explained or reduced to data points. And sometimes, if we're lucky and truly respectful, those mysteries will reveal themselves to us. I hope sharing this story will give people a different perspective on the wilderness and the creatures living within it. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I understand the skepticism. I truly do. But maybe, just maybe, it will make someone stop the next time they're in the woods and see something strange. Maybe, instead of running, shooting, or chasing it away, they'll stop and observe. They'll give whatever it is a chance to either reveal itself or hide, if that's its choice. And if you ever come face to face with a Bigfoot, remember what I've learned. Don't run, don't shoot. Just stand still, respect it, and see what happens. These creatures have kept their distance from us for generations, but they're also curious about us. If the right circumstances align, if someone approaches them with openness rather than fear, they may choose to close that gap. I was given that opportunity, and it changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. The hunter became the hunted, then became something entirely different. A witness, a student, maybe even a friend. And now, after many years and many trips, I know for sure that we are not alone in this world. and the creatures we share it with are far more incredible than we ever imagined. The large Bigfoot is growing older, and so am I. The time we have together is limited, and I'm keenly aware of that with every trip I make. But I'm grateful for every moment, every encounter, every new thing I've learned about these extraordinary beings. They've given me a priceless gift, and the least I can do is cherish it by protecting their privacy and respecting their choice to remain hidden from the world. So, I'll continue making those trips to the mountains as long as I have the strength. I'll keep sitting by the campfire at night, waiting for that massive shape to appear from the trees. I'll keep bringing apples, jerky, and candy bars. I'll keep taking photos I'll never share publicly. I'll keep learning from creatures that most people still think don't exist. And maybe, one day, when enough time has passed and the circumstances have changed, I'll find a way to share more of what I've learned. Maybe there will come a time when the world is ready to learn about these creatures without trying to exploit or destroy them. Maybe future generations will be wiser than we are and will respect the wild creatures that share this planet with us. Until then, I will keep their secret. I will protect their privacy, and I will cherish every moment spent with them, knowing I've been gifted something rare and precious. A glimpse into a hidden world. A friendship with creatures that bridge the gap between animal and human. A reminder that mystery and wonder still exist for those patient and respectful enough to find them. The mountains are calling again, another trip is coming, and somewhere deep in those ancient forests, a Bigfoot family is living its life, completely unaware that they've changed mine forever. Or maybe they know. Maybe that big male Bigfoot understands in a way that I can't fully comprehend the significance of our encounters for both of us. Maybe that's why Bigfoot returns year after year to sit by my campfire, to share a few quiet hours before I return to my world and Bigfoot returns to his. I don't have all the answers. Maybe I never will. But I know this. There is so much more to this world than we can see, measure, and explain. There are mysteries hidden in the wilderness, intelligence in forms we don't recognize, beauty in creatures that we still consider to be myths and legends, and sometimes, if we're lucky, that mystery will reveal itself and change everything we thought we knew. That's what happened to me. I went into the mountains as a hunter and came out as a different person. The big male Bigfoot stalked me through the woods, and I ran in terror. But when I finally stopped running and faced my fear, I found something wonderful waiting on the other side. I found connection, understanding, friendship with a creature I never believed existed. And now, many years later, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. The terror of that first encounter, the exhaustion from trying to escape, the moment I collapsed and prepared for the final battle, all of it led to something beautiful and profound. The hunter became the prey, and then both the hunter and the prey became something greater. That is my story. That's what happened to me on those mountains, and it's why I keep returning after every trip. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just sharing what I've experienced, what I've learned, and what I continue to learn every time I make a long trek into the wild. Bigfoot is real. I know it because I've sat with Bigfoot, eaten with Bigfoot, learned from Bigfoot, and if you're lucky enough to have a similar encounter, I hope you make the same choice I did. Lower your weapon, calm your fear, and let the mystery unfold. You never know what will happen. Maybe you'll realize that the creature you thought was stalking you is actually offering you something far more valuable. An opportunity to see the world in a new way, to understand that we're not alone, and to recognize intelligence and awareness in forms we've never imagined. That's worth more than any title, any proof, or any fame. It's worth everything, and I'll carry it with me for the rest of my life. A gift from a creature that most people will never believe exists. A friendship that bridges the divide between species. A reminder that wonder and magic still exist, waiting for those brave enough to explore. To hear more amazing stories, click here.